and welcome again to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Delighted to be with you on this Wednesday afternoon. Hope you can hear us over the fan. It's hot in lots of places. And we have a couple of great guests today. Second hour, we're going to do a pro-life open forum. So you have questions about life in any stage, about how ethical treatment of the sick, ethical treatment of those who are at the very end of life or at the very beginning of life. Dr. George Delgado will be here to help us through that, so you are welcome to call second hour to talk to Dr. Delgado, 888-318-7884. This hour, we tackle a topic we have not spent a great deal of time on, but I think is actually a very, very important one, and it's the martyrs. And we'll start by focusing a little bit on the apostolic fathers and the martyrdoms in the early church, but also about the role of martyrdom in defending the faith. I have to say I have a little bit of a dog in this fight, in that I think often the idea that the church became corrupted in its early years is really insulting to the people who gave their lives in the name of the faith in the early years of the church, who lived as good Christian Catholics, and because of that, they face the ultimate penalty under the auspices of the Roman Empire. 888-318-7884 is our number here. 888-318-7884. If you would like to discuss the martyrs, martyrdom in general, whether it's today or at an earlier time in the history of the church, you're welcome to call. 888-318-7884. Steve Ray is our guest for this conversation. You probably couldn't get a better guest for this conversation. He himself is a convert from the Baptist faith to the Catholic Church and the author of several best-selling books, including Crossing the Tiber and St. John's Gospel. He made the 10-part DVD series, The Footprints of God, the story of salvation from Abraham to Augustine. And well, there's a lot more interesting things you should know about Steve, but we'll get to them as we go. Steve Ray, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on. Can you hear me all right?
Very well, yes, thank you.
Very good. This is the Yeti microphone here. It's working good today.
Oh, the legendary Yeti microphone.
So I'm glad to be with you. I'm glad to do this show. I have great respect and love for the martyrs, and I concur with what you said, that it's insulting when groups like Seventh-day Adventists and all these others say that the early Christians fell off the rails. In other words, they lost their true Christianity early on, and Ellen Smith had to come in and restore it, or the Mormons, they had to, and the Muslims as well, that they all had to come in and restore it after the fact. I'll tell you what, the Christians came out of the chutes right, and we're still here today in the Catholic Church.
As far as the apostolic fathers, I'm actually very interested in them, maybe particularly this year, because we have our big conference coming up on how the early church was the Catholic Church. These apostolic fathers, can you tell us about them and about their martyrdoms and what they meant to the church?
Well, I'll start out first by telling what they mean to me, because as an evangelical Protestant, I was convinced exactly what we were just talking about, that the early Christians fell off the tracks like a train coming out of the station, and they didn't get very far down the tracks, and they got pushed and shoved off, and paganism came into the Catholic Church. And it wasn't until later on Martin Luther, and for me it was Martin Luther, got the train back up on the tracks with real biblical Christianity, faith alone, Bible alone, all of those mantras. And but you know what? Somebody challenged me about the apostolic fathers. A friend of mine became a Catholic, and I told him that was the stupidest thing I ever heard of in my whole life. He was way too smart to be a Catholic. I went to the early writings of the church to try and prove that he was wrong, because I was convinced that those early Christians were Protestants, real simple Protestants that got confused, with all the Marian stuff. And anyway, I won't go into all that. But I started to read the early Christians, because I said, why do I care so much about what my pastor says today, 2,000 years removed, when I could go back and read the very first pastors who knew the apostles?
Right.
And I went back to use them against my friend, and I end up becoming a Catholic because of these guys. That's why I love them so much, because they twisted my arm behind my back and dragged me into the Catholic Church kicking and screaming, as the last thing I wanted to be was a Catholic. So but what I found is that these guys that knew the apostles, and we'll talk about 5 of them today, Justin Martyr, he was a generation beyond, but Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp of Smyrna, Irenaeus of Lyon, Clement of Rome, and these guys, they were the first centuries, first and into the second centuries, and they suffered martyrdoms, and they wrote. So I could go back and read what they wrote, and I could understand. These guys are real Christians right from the beginning. In fact, they didn't even have a New Testament yet. They couldn't have even had this Bible alone thing because they didn't have a New Testament yet. What they had was the words of the apostles still ringing in their ears. And these guys suffered martyrdoms. And they didn't do it because they had a Bible under their arm to convince them of the truth. They did it because they heard the bishops, and they heard the tradition, and they had the Catholic Church, and they went out, and when they were challenged, they were willing to have, in Justin Martyr's case, his head cut off. In Polycarp's case, he was burned at the stake. In Ignatius's case, he was eaten by lions. In Clement of Rome, he was drowned. So we got these great guys, and they were martyrs. And many of them could have walked away from the martyrdom. They could have said, no, I call it quits. Hey, look, this was a great religion as long as it made me happy, clappy, and going to heaven. But, hey, you start showing me these teeth and the swords and the fire and stuff. Hey, I'm out of here, I'm getting out of this place. Well, they didn't do that. They went to their deaths knowing that they would end up in heaven. And these guys have my everlasting gratitude and respect.
It's fascinating that you can that they can make converts even today, I guess is the way to say it. That
yeah.
If you just read them, these very earliest Christians, men who knew the apostles. I don't think in Justin Martyr's case that is true, but certainly Clement of Rome, a guy that knew both Peter and Paul, and Polycarp, who knew John the Apostle, and they can convert you to the fullness of the faith that was handed on to them by the apostles.
And if you want to learn more, I just add, you sell my book in your store called Crossing the Tiber, How Evangelical Protestants Discovered the Historic Church. And in there, I go through all of these guys' lives, all of their teachings, and how they convinced me to become Catholic. It's called Crossing the Tiber. And you're absolutely right. These guys, they were real Christians. They really knew the faith. They learned it from the apostles, and they were willing to suffer and die for it. And I also made a movie called Apostolic Fathers, Handing on the Faith, and I cover those 5. And I went to all of the places. I discovered the places where they were killed, and we go there and we talk about it from the location where they suffered their martyrdoms. And we do their whole story and prove what they really believed. And some of them, and not just them, but many of the others, suffered horrendously painful and extended martyrdoms. And I'm thinking also, there's a church in Rome. It's one of my favorites. Whenever I take our groups to Rome, by the way, we have one going the first week of December if anybody wants to join us. We have Mass at this church that most people never see. It's called San Stefano Rotondo. That's St. Stephen in the round. And round churches were built very rarely, but the Romans built round temples as victory temples. They were celebrating victories. And this was a celebration of a victory. St. Stephen, the first martyr, it's named after him. And when you go into that church, you have to be prepared for it because all the way around, it's like, in a way, a cartoon. It's like opening a comic book. You walk around the walls, and it's all murals of all of the gory, gross martyrdoms. Can you imagine taking your kids for Mass back in those days when there's big color pictures of people being tortured in front of you through the whole Mass? It's quite an amazing thing what the early Christians suffered. But I'll just close with this because I know I'm talking too much. That these guys were the hinge figures. They suffered and died. Had they refused to do it, you and I wouldn't be here today.
Right.
Christianity would not have survived. We only survived because they were the hinge figures. They paid the price to hand the faith on to the next generation.
888-318-7884 is the number if you'd like to talk with Steve Ray. And when we get back, Steve, I have to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to ask you about how these martyrs and their martyrdom, their witness, was treated by the early church. What did the other, say, leaders of the church say about these martyrdoms? And we have to talk, if we're going to talk about martyrdom, we have to talk about what's going on in the world today, because the age of martyrs has certainly returned in many places. And those of us who are in more comfortable surroundings maybe need to be more attentive to the fact that our brothers and sisters in the faith are, in fact, even now dying for the faith. Again, if you'd like to call, 888-318-7884. Right back with more Steve Ray on the Martyrs on Catholic Answers Live.
Join us on air today on Catholic Answers Live.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
How is it possible that God created everything?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Why is the Catholic Church so unwilling to
The Catholic Church is too rich.
Catholics worship Mary and are committed.
As far as I'm concerned, all religions are equal.
You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. Tonight, 11 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
St. John Paul II stated that, for the disciple of Christ, evangelization is a duty, an obligation of love, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that evangelization is necessary for salvation.
So we know we're called, but how do we do it?
St. Paul Street Evangelization can help. To learn more, contact us at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Steve Ray is our guest this hour, the inimitable Steve Ray, and you see him on EWTN. You maybe got some of his videos here or there or read one of his books. And in addition to all the media work he does, he also takes people to the Holy Land and to Rome and other pilgrimage sites around the world, including Ireland and Mexico City that I can remember. Is there any pilgrimage site you haven't been to, Steve?
If it's not Catholic, we don't go there. Like, I have no interest in going to the Caribbean or Hawaii or something. If you gave me a free trip, I wouldn't go. I want to go to biblical sites and Catholic sites, and there aren't very many of those we haven't gone to.
So you're saying the Hawaii's not in the Bible? This is important news. Okay, I was not aware of that. You should go, though. It's very nice. 888-318-7884, the number, 888-318-7884. Okay, so what did the early church think about this martyrdom? In a certain way, I guess as modern people, we're like, well, you probably could have just, fudged it a little bit here or there and gotten your way out of it. And why did these people go to their death?
There were cases where they could have gotten out of it, but they didn't, because it was usually related to denying what you believed. But Ignatius of Antioch is very interesting because he wrote a letter ahead of time. He knew he was coming there from Syria. He was chained to soldiers on his way to Rome for the purpose of being killed in the Colosseum. And he wrote a letter ahead of time and says, I know that there are many of you who are Christians there now who have influence, who could go and have discussions with the emperor's people, and you could probably get me out of this, but I don't want you to. The lions are my way to God. I want to be the grain that's ground by their teeth into the bread of Christ. It's very Eucharistic in its tone. And he said, please do not try to save me, because he's basically saying, I'm lived a full life. I am a believer in Christ. He died for me. I'm ready to die for him. And that was one of the motivating factors for many of the martyrs, is that Jesus died for me. He was God in heaven. He didn't even have to come down and do this. He didn't have to become a man. That was a scandal of the incarnation. And it only was the scandal of the cross that made it worse. But he came down here and died for me. Now, would I deny him? If you deny me before men on earth, I'll deny you before my Father in heaven, he said. And he said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his soul? The early Christians had the attitude of, Jesus died for me, and said that we were also going to, if they hated him, they're going to hate us. And I want to die the same way he did. I want to honor him that way.
Again, 888-318-7884, the number. Did these martyrdoms in the early church have an effect? I mean, there's a certain way in which in the ancient world, these humiliating deaths were really a sign that you were not favored by the gods. So how did ancient people who were not Christian respond to these martyrdoms?
The ancient people knew that those gods were also mythical, that they weren't really there. They didn't exist. They were as evil as the people were. Yeah. They were up in heaven having all these relationships, and they were just exalted human beings is what they were. And the Romans knew that they were mythical. And the Romans watched the Christians. And Justin Martyr said that he became a Christian partly because he watched the Christians die. In other words, he was a philosopher, a pagan philosopher. He followed Plato and Aristotle and all the others. But then he came to question this, and he saw the Christians die. And he says, wait a minute, how can they, if we say they're such criminals, if they're such wicked people, how can we watch them die? And they don't die like we do. We don't like die. We curse and we swear. Look at them. They're worshiping God. They're praying to the God. They're singing hymns. They're helping one another. Yeah. They could deny him and they don't. And so what the Romans did is they said, these people have something that we don't have. What do they have? How can they die like that when we don't? What do they have that we don't have? And they started to realize that the Christians had not only something worth living for, they had something worth dying for. It was really, really true.
That's a powerful, powerful witness. And then you think of a person like Justin Martyr, if he says that the martyrs before him who died joyfully affected him. And then here's a man who presents essentially, he's the first person to kind of use philosophy to present the faith, and he presents it directly to the emperor.
He did. He says, we're your friends. He was a philosopher. And when he came to his martyrdom, the governor, the procurator, said to him, we can let you go if you deny your Christ. He says, I can't deny my Christ. I'm a Christian. He says, well, what do you believe? He said, I have studied all the philosophies. I've studied them all, and I have concluded that the Christians have the true philosophy. So you think that when you die, you will go to heaven? Justin Martyr says, no, I don't think so. I know so.
Yeah.
I can have you whipped. Whip me. Do whatever you will. I'm a Christian. We still have the court records of this conversation. He said, you whip me, do whatever you want, but I am a Christian. He said, I can have your head cut off. Deny your Christ. He said, I cannot deny my Christ. I am a Christian. And they took him out and they whipped him and they cut off his head. And then they brought all of his students, because he was a philosophy teacher. And he brought all of his students, and we still have the list of their names. And all of them said the same thing. We are Christians. We are not the enemies of the empire. We are your friends. We are your loyal subjects. But we will put Jesus Christ first. And they were all whipped and beheaded too.
Let's go to Eric in Houston, Texas. Eric's listening on 1430 AM KSHJ. Eric, your question for our guest, Steve Ray.
Good afternoon, guys. What I was wondering is, how do you prove, I guess, or how do you know the writings of those early Christians are actually their writings? And then I guess the second part is, how do most Christians outside of Catholicism regard them and their writings?
Very good question, Eric. I will say that we know that they're the writings because they're very well attested to in history. We have the writings of Homer and all kinds of others, Plato and Aristotle, and nobody questions those. And there is a science. There's a science that studies those kind of things. They take the documents and they research them. What were these words used at this period of time? Is the writings symbolic of that age and so on? But the writings of the fathers are not doubted. There are a couple certain spurious editions of them, like Ignatius of Antioch has somebody elaborated some of his talks. But those who study linguistics and the ancient art of these documents, they have come to the conclusion that these are their writings. They are not doubted. Protestants do too. In fact, on my shelf right now in front of me, I have a set of 28 volumes of the writings of the church fathers, including the ones I'm talking to you, and it's a Protestant publisher and a Protestant edition with a Protestant introduction to all of their writings. So Protestants recognize these guys. Whether they agree with what they say or not is another issue. But that the fact that they are legitimate, authentic writings from the 1st century, 2nd century, there's no question about that. And Protestants also accept them.
Eric, does that address your question? No? I'm going to go with yes. That addressed Eric's question, but he sounded like he was on the road. He might have had to hang up. I don't know. So you can. There's not a sense of, oh, these are just. I mean, well, as you said, there are spurious writings. I think there's some that are claimed to be Polycarp's that people would say no, that Polycarp didn't really write those, but he did write these over here. So you get that kind of thing, but there's not. It strikes me as similar to the people who will say, "Well, Jesus Christ didn't," or Jesus of Nazareth is probably the way they'll say it. He didn't really exist. He's a mythical figure. Well, no serious historian is going to say that, nor are they going to say Clement of Rome wasn't really Clement of Rome.
Right, because not only do you have the writings of Clement of Rome and Antioch, but you have others writing about them and quoting them even during their lifetime or the next generation. They're not going to be quoting their documents and writings if they knew that they were mythical and didn't exist. So the fact that these guys really wrote and really existed and really died this way, there's not any doubt about that at all.
Eric, I want to give you a chance to have a follow-up question if you've got one. Are you there with us? And oh, I see. Eric's listening to he's listening to the radio.
I heard myself.
Yeah, you were better the second time too, I got to say. All right, we'll move on then. Eric, thanks very much for the call. I hope that it was helpful. Christy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, listening on St. Michael Catholic Radio. You are up next. Your question for Steve Ray.
Hi,
hello, Christy.
Yes. My Protestant neighbor gave me a book called Fox's Book of Martyrs. And my question has to do with...
I just want to make sure everybody heard it here. Hang on. It's Fox's Book of Martyrs, correct?
Foxes, Fox's Book of Martyrs. And just to clarify, it is a very anti-Catholic Protestant book that tries to make it look like the Catholics we've spent all of our time killing Protestants. Yeah. And it's a very dishonest book and very spurious book. I have it. I used to use it. Now I realize what it really is.
But we're not. I just wanted to make sure people knew who the book was. We do want to hear your question, Christy. Go ahead.
Yep.
No? Christy, did we shut you down too? All right.
Well, I think I know where she was going with that. If you want me to.
Yeah. Well,
answer it.
It comes from the period when Catholics and Protestants were locked. Their horns were locked in English history for a good long time, and so this is a book that really is, I think, generally recognized as a propaganda book from the Protestant side about just how horrible Catholics are. Not to say that nothing in it ever happened, but it's very dramatic. So go ahead.
There was bad things that happened on both sides.
Sure.
We all admit that. And you don't come to a knowledge of what the truth is by how big your body count is. There were abuses on both sides because we're human beings, and the Catholic Church also has human beings, and they made mistakes too. But I have to say that exaggerations, often many things like that the reformers, I call them the deformers now, wrote, there was a lot of exaggerations. That also goes with the Crusades and the Inquisition, which I'm not an expert on. You have other guests that talk about those issues, but I know that a lot of those are exaggerated, and Fox's Book of Martyrs is one of those.
888-318-7884, the number. We're talking about the martyrs, 888-318-7884. It is certainly true, however, Steve Ray, that there are Protestant men and women who in missionary activities or around the world have given their lives in witness to the gospel as well.
Yes, there was one. He went to the Auca Indians. I think of his name in a second. Jim Elliot. And he flew Cessna airplanes into the Amazon to bring the gospel to them, and they killed him. And his wife then went back later and continued to work with them, knowing she too might be martyred, but end up bringing them to Christ. Those many, many Protestants die with us as Catholics, shed their blood for the faith, and we love them and we recognize their heroic faith and their trust in Christ as well. My dad used to quote Jim Elliot to me all the time, that when Jim Elliot was heading out there to fly and knowing he might die, he said, "A man is no fool to give up what he cannot keep to gain that which he can never lose." Yeah. And we should face the fact as well that when you look at the 20 centuries of Christianity, there were more martyrs that died for Jesus Christ in the last century than in all prior 19 centuries put together. We have seen more martyrs for Christianity and Jesus Christ, Protestant and Catholic alike, in the last 150 years than all 19 centuries put together. We have had a heroic bunch of Christians who have died for Jesus and done so willingly.
You think of a Protestant like Dietrich Bonhoeffer or a Catholic like Maximilian Kolbe. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Trent Horn, and you've probably heard me explain Catholicism to non-Catholic callers on the radio or engage opponents in formal public debates. I've always hoped these interactions would show people how to graciously defend and share our faith. But they're not enough. That's why I've created a weekly podcast that will help Catholics answer the toughest objections against our faith. Every episode of the Council of Trent will provide listeners with a conversation roadmap that will help them share their faith with anyone. Keep in mind that I hate boring lectures. These podcasts will contain entertaining, informative, and practical explanations of the faith, as well as interviews with the best Catholic writers and speakers in the world today. Visit TrentHornPodcast.com today to find out how you can subscribe to my new podcast. That's TrentHornPodcast.com.
Interested in visiting Catholic Answers? If you live in or plan to visit beautiful Southern California, we'd love to have you come by for a tour. You can meet our apologists and staff, visit our chapel, and watch the broadcast of Catholic Answers Live. To arrange a tour, call us at 619-387-7200 or email us at visit@catholic.com.
Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Turns out that today, as back then, this question has a lot of different answers. So many groups want to appropriate Jesus, tweaking his identity until he looks and sounds just like one of them. But then you no longer have the Lord, says apologist Trent Horn. You have an imposter. In his new groundbreaking book, Counterfeit Christ, Trent exposes 18 phony versions of Jesus that we encounter today, helping you to recognize the fakes when you see them, explain why they're phony, and make a case for the full truth and beauty of who Jesus is, the Christ, the Son of the living God. Order your copy of Counterfeit Christ today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
I'm Gloria Purvis.
And I'm Deacon Harold. The Morning Glory team talks about Uncle Nearest, the man behind the jack.
Tomorrow morning, 7 Eastern. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We're talking about the martyrs today with Steve Ray. Our guest, Steve, the author of a whole bunch of really good books, and he put the 10-part DVD series. No, I can't remember if that includes the how shall I put this? The descent into the mud on your part, or is that in a different one?
I have 9 of them, and all of them I get in mud and ride horses and fall off horses
But there's one for the Immaculate Conception.
Yeah, that's Mary.
Yeah, okay, so that's not in this, the 10.
That's not in Apostolic Fathers. That's in Mary to explain the Immaculate Conception.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. Steve is the author also of books such as The Footprints of God The Footprints of God we were just talking about, Crossing the Tiber and St. John's Gospel, among others. And also you can go to CatholicConvert.com to find out all about the various pilgrimages that Steve and his wife lead around the world. CatholicConvert.com. 888-318-7884, the number. But I got to tell you, if it sounded like maybe we were being rude to a couple callers there. It actually turned out that we're having a phone problem and they couldn't hear us. So they weren't failing to respond to us, and we weren't getting rid of them unceremoniously. We were actually having a little phone problem, and they're resetting the phones right now. So for the moment, we've got Steve with us, and we're happy to take your calls as we get the phone system back up. 888-318-7884. What does it mean, Steve, when and I don't even know who said this, but there's an ancient saying about the martyrs that the blood of the martyrs is the
Tertullian.
Tertullian, okay, is the seed of the church. What does that mean?
And Augustine, too.
Oh,
Can I read you the quote from Augustine?
Yes, please.
Okay, it happened, Tertullian said it because he also watched Christians die. And, for example, they would take them into kill them. And Tertullian would say, by the word arena is a Latin word for sand. They would take them into the arena with the white sand, and they would kill people, and the blood would splatter in the white sand and make a big impression, and people would cheer, "Kill more, kill more," and it would get a frenzy. And Tertullian said, "You kill us out in your arenas, but I want you to know that every time a drop of blood hits your sand, that 10 more Christians will grow from the seed you just planted, because you are killing us, but we have something worth living for and something worth dying for that you know nothing about. And when you kill us, more and more Romans will see how we die, and they will be willing to also come into the faith." And so the way he said it is the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Listen to what Augustine said. "The earth has been filled with the blood of the martyrs as with seed, and from the seed have sprung the crops of the church. The martyrs have spoken Christ's cause more effectively when dead than when they were alive. They preach him today. Their tongues are silent, yet their deeds echo around the world. They were arrested, bound in prison, brought to trial, tortured, burned at the stake, stoned to death, run through, fed to wild beasts. In all kinds of death they were jeered as worthless, but precious in the sight of the Lord of his death of his godly ones. They are the seed of the church. You kill one, 10 more will grow up from the seed you planted."
And it happened.
It
did indeed.
The church spread through the whole Roman Empire.
For some Christians, this is difficult. This kind of Catholic, sort of intense lauding of the martyrs. And Kathy from the Philippines on Facebook says her sister-in-law is a born-again Christian, and she wants to know the basis of why we make martyrs saints. And she singles out in this note that she sent us Maria Goretti. So why would a person like Maria Goretti be made a saint in the Catholic Church?
Well, that goes into another topic about saints and what they are. I basically say there's a small s and a large S, capital S, saint. All of us are saints with a small s. Paul writes to the Philippians, and he says, I was going to say to the Filipinos because you had the email.
The Philippines, yes.
Paul writes to the Philippians, and he writes to them as the saints who are in Philippi, yet they're all alive. The word saint with a small s, the way I describe it, means the word can mean two things. It means consecrated or set apart for God. It can also mean without sin. You and I are sanctified and set apart for God. Therefore, we are saints. We're the holy ones. And that's a small s. But then the ones with a capital S are those who have already proved that they have put Jesus Christ first. They loved him more than their own life. Therefore, if someone goes like Ignatius of Antioch says, "Don't stop the lions." When he went there, the lions saw red meat. Ignatius saw his way to God. And when the lions would eat these guys or the fires would burn them, they would pray and they'd raise their hands to heaven. Polycarp, we have still the prayer that he prayed while the flames are going up. And he prayed and thanked God for the blessing that he could die for Jesus. Now, we believe that they go right to heaven. Now, Protestants, of course, believe everybody who accepts Christ as their Savior, whether you sin or don't sin or whatever, there's all kinds of permutations on that, go straight to heaven. But we, as Catholics, know that the one who dies and is a martyr goes straight into the presence of God, and we honor them. The early Christians honored them. They called it their birthday. The day that you died in Christ as a martyr, meant that was kind of the day that you were died into your new heavenly life. We collect their bones and we keep them, just like the baseballs has the relics or the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. This is kind of the theme of our movie on Apostolic Fathers, that they have Hall of Fame, but we had a Hall of Fame way before Cooperstown for baseball, football. We have our saints and we have their relics. We have the baseball mitts and the bats and we have their bones and their things to remind us of their heroic death, ready to go to Jesus Christ. Remember, Jesus said before he went up to heaven, he said, "You will be my witnesses." And the Greek word for that is martus. Guess what English word we get from martus? You will be my martuses, my witnesses, which is the Greek word for witness, but it's where we get our word martyr. So we honor the martyrs. Protestants also honor martyrs.
So I think maybe the Kathy's sister in the Philippines is worried about Maria Goretti, mostly because Maria Goretti is a rape victim and briefly a survivor thereof, and there's a lot of sexual assault, rape that goes on. Why is Maria Goretti a saint? I think that's what she wants the answer to.
Well, what happens is that, and it also happened in the early church, we have these women who were forced into relationships, forced into sexual things, raped or whatever, and they fought and they said no, and the basis was because I'm a Christian and I would rather die than have a thing happen to me that would violate me, and my body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, and I refuse to do that, and I would rather die than have you take me away and do this. It's called heroic virtue. Okay. Those who practice heroic virtue in life, where they refuse. Now, let's say, for example, that I go out and I get in a political rally, and I'm protesting, or I'm voicing even if it's for a good cause, and I get killed for that. That's not necessarily going to be a martyr, because it wasn't for my faith. Mm-hmm. The martyrs are those who practice heroic virtue, and it's based on Jesus Christ, and they're willing to die for their faith rather than to deny the faith.
Again, I'm going to give out the number. I will try with the calls again. We'll see how the phone system's going. 888-318-7884. I apologize to those who got knocked off before because of our troubles here on our end. 888-318-7884 is the number. Steve Ray is our guest. Our topic is the martyrs. If you have questions about martyrs, if you have questions about martyrdom in particular, or there's a particular person who gave their life for Christ that you'd like to ask Steve about, there are very many. There are millions of them, so I can't guarantee that he will know all of them, but you never know with Steve Ray. Before we take a break, I want to let you know that we've got an on-the-go half-price digital sale starting today on shop.catholic.com. 1 week only, 50% off all ebooks, e-magazines, MP3s. If you can take it to go, and we don't have to mail it to you, if it's an electronic download, you're getting it for half off. Just visit shop.catholic.com to take advantage of the great deals, hundreds of digital products, and that sale ends when this week ends, so you want to get over there and do it quickly.
Every question is important. Ask yours today on Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
The prayers of the elderly are powerful. Why? Because you learn in old age to depend upon God. There's no one else. Because you are still made to the image and likeness of God, no matter how old you are. You're valuable to God. Don't let anybody tell you you're not.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Talking about the martyrs this hour with Steve Ray, our guest. Steve, a noted Catholic author, a defender of the faith, produces media. You pretty much do whatever you can to make sure that people come to the fullness of the Christian faith in the Catholic Church. Would that be a sum it up there for you there, Steve?
It's what I love to do. People say, how do you get all those books written and pilgrimages and movies and all that stuff? It's because I don't golf. There's nothing wrong with golfing. But my wife, if you say, if people say Steve gets a lot done, and I say, well, because she said he doesn't golf. And if you give him an hour free time, that's what he's going to do. He's going to study the Bible. He's going to write. It's my passion. It's my passion.
Yeah. Would you share with me the sense? I wonder if we share this that when the fanatics of ISIS and that particular Wahhabist Islam just drove across in their trucks and tanks, killing people all over the Middle East. Our Christian brothers and sisters, among others as well, other religious groups as well, but Christian brothers, in our case, they were Christians whose communities had been there long before there was ever a Muslim walking this earth.
Exactly.
And they were brutalized, they were enslaved, they were killed, they were every horrible thing. And you get a sense, okay, this is something, this is in the modern world, a redo of exactly what happened at certain times, not all the time, but at certain times, like during Diocletian's reign in the ancient world.
And during Nazi times, and during Soviet times, and during North Korea times, and
Japan.
During Muslim countries now, like Pakistan, and in China, there are Christians suffering and being martyrs all over the world even now. And I know stories about what ISIS did to Christians that you don't know, and I wouldn't even share on the air because I have friends in the Holy Land who have relatives and families on the other side. And what these whole villages were subject to is inhumane and not even mentionable on the air.
Right.
But I will tell you also that the stories coming out in the testimonies that whole villages of Christians, all they had to do to convert was to say, there is one God and it's Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's all you have to say. And you are now a Muslim if you say it from your heart and you mean it. And people are forced to say that. But there are whole villages in Iraq and Syria that when they came, not one person did. They took their babies away from them. They did all kinds of horrendous things, but they did not deny Christ, and they did not convert to Allah and Islam.
Yeah.
And so we have this going on all over the world today. I'm just reading about what's happening in China and in North Korea. Look what's happening in Pakistan.
Right.
All over the world. We live in a bubble. I don't think we're grateful as we should be for the freedoms that we have. And if we don't use our freedoms, we're going to lose them. What you don't use, you lose. I'm afraid that my grandkids, I have 16 of them now, and they're marvelous Catholic kids they share their faith. They're apologists, man. They'll eat your head off if you try to convert them out of the Catholic Church. But from the very beginning, I said when my grandkids were in the room to my own kids, I want you to raise my grandchildren to be martyrs. And little Maria Faustina would say, but Grandpa, why do you want us all to die? And I'd say, Maria, I don't want you to die, but I want you to know that there's something worth dying for. You never deny Jesus. You never deny his church, even if it means you have to die for it, because I'm a very selfish grandfather. Mm-hmm. And I hope and intend to get to heaven, and I want you to be there with me. So never, ever deny Jesus, even if you have to die for it.
But sometimes, Steve, I feel very sheepish if someone says, because people like us, who talk into microphones, people will say things like, well, it's very courageous of you to stand up for the faith and that kind of thing. And you just think,
I'm a coward.
No, it is not. It is not.
I hate pain.
It's courageous of the people who stood on their faith when ISIS came through. I hate pain. Yeah.
I don't like pain. I don't like the thought of suffering. I don't like dying. I don't even like any of those thoughts. But my prayer is, Si, that if it ever comes my way, if I'm ever put in the position where I have to become a martyr in order to retain my faith and my witness for Jesus Christ, that he will give me the grace at that moment to withstand the pain. When you look at the martyrs, you see something takes over in their whole composure. It's almost as though God turns pain into pleasure. It's almost as though he he shuts down that part of their nervous system, and they are glorifying God in the midst of their suffering. I only pray that when it comes time for me to go down as a martyr, that it says that there is nothing that has overcome us, that he does not give us the grace to accomplish. I pray that he would do that, because otherwise I'm not one who enjoys pain. I don't know that I could do it on a human level.
I know I couldn't, but I do also, Steve. And then I know you want to share a story with us, and I want you to. But you get a sense of we all believe in ecumenism. The church should be one, and all of that. But you get the sense that, like, I remember when those on Easter, when churches in the Coptic part of Egypt were blown up, and people, I mean, horrific stuff. And I honestly, I never felt such a spiritual closeness to Coptic Christians. Like, those are Christians that are on the other side of the world. I don't know them. I'm not Coptic, I'm a Catholic. So you get the sense that there's some of the ecumenical work that to be done is in the shedding of blood, and that's what makes us recognize.
You're absolutely right. The way I say it is, in front of an abortion clinic or a machine gun, that all my brothers and sisters in Christ who are willing to profess the name of Jesus, recite the creed with me, be baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, especially those who are willing to do this no matter what, they cross themselves. When we're in public, we stand together arm in arm. It's when we get into the living room that I'll sit down and I'll talk to a Protestant about our differences, or the Coptics about our differences. But when we are out in public, we need to keep a steady and a united front, because now we are fighting a very secular world, and we are no longer the mainstream. We as Christians are becoming the despised subculture. And it's not going to get easier. It's going to get more difficult. We're going to need to side with our Protestant brothers and sisters and other people of goodwill to survive. And those who are willing to die for Jesus, I think it's a great sign of ecumenism, and that we all worship the same Jesus.
I want to give again the name of Steve Ray's DVD, Apostolic Fathers, Handing on the Faith. And that covers those early apostolic fathers, men, at least 4 out of the 5, who knew the apostles directly: Ignatius, Clement, Irenaeus, and Polycarp, and the great Justin Martyr, the philosopher who tried to convert the emperor, I guess is the way to put it. But Steve, you wanted to share a martyr
in those stories. In that movie, I go to all the places where they were martyred, and it's kind of graphic, but I show what happened and I read what they said about it. And one, Polycarp, I'm in flames going all up around me. I'll let you figure out how we did that. But it's the 12th Legion. This is back in the year 320. And St. Basil, doctor of the church, told the story. And there's a altar in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem dedicated to these 40 soldiers. Licinius was the emperor, and he heard that the 12th Legion, who were nicknamed the Armed with Lightning, they were some of the best and bravest warriors of the Roman Empire, and he had sent them to fight in faraway Armenia. No soldiers are braver or more loyal than this band of soldiers. I'm going to read this a little bit here, but also tell it. When news reached Emperor Licinius that there were many Roman soldiers had accepted the Christian faith, he made a decree and dispatched it. If there are any among your soldiers who cling to the faith of Christianity, they must die. The prefect called the soldiers together in Armenia and said, "Are any of you Christians?" 40 of them stepped forward and stood at attention. The prefect had not expected so many, nor such select soldiers. He demanded they deny their Christ and offer sacrifices to the pagan gods, the gods of Rome. They refused. Not a single man would deny his Lord. He demanded that they remove their uniforms, throw their swords down on the ice, and he told them to go out onto the ice of the lake naked. In the meantime, while those 40 men were out on the ice, they built fires along the shore and said, anytime you want to deny Christ, you can come back. We have tubs of water for you, and you can get warm instantly, to entice them to recant. They were marched out onto the ice, and what you heard was them chanting, 40 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown. In the night, overcome by cold, one of the soldiers caved in, and he came in to get in that warm tub of water. But the contrast between the cold and the hot, it killed him when he got in that cold water. One man came back. But there was a soldier who looked at them and could not believe that those men were out there. And the chant went from 40 soldiers to 39 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory and the victor's crown, as they're freezing out on the lake. One of the guards who was watching these men freeze out there saw a miraculous light over the lake, over these men, not a physical thing, but a miraculous spiritual thing. And he threw his sword into the snow and took his clothes off, and he marched out with them. And the 39 now went back to 40 soldiers fighting for thee, O Christ, to win for thee the victory. He said, I too am a Christian. And he went out and joined them. They went out in the morning, and they were all stiff, dead, frozen bodies on the lake. They burned their bodies, and the ashes they tossed over the ice. When I give that story, when I go to conferences, I said, do you think those men, some of them had families back home, they had maybe businesses, they had a future ahead of them, and they threw it all away. What a waste! What a waste of 40 lives. But if I called them all up to the radio station today and I said, was it a waste that you gave your life for Jesus Christ? What do you think the unanimous reply would be? I gave my life to Jesus Christ because he gave his life for me, and I'd do it all over again. Praise God.
Amen, Steve. Praise God. And it gives you a sense that when you say that about how martyrdom itself points us beyond this world, that especially as we get very comfortable in the modern world, we can kind of get lulled into thinking, well, success in this world is what I want, or, or this or that, vacation or whatever. But martyrdom points us beyond this world. Don't make this world your home. Don't get comfortable here. There's nothing here that will ultimately satisfy you.
Exactly. We say we're spiritual and we're real Catholics, but I think in many ways we become living like a secular person, in the sense that we focus our life here more than we do in the heavenly world. Paul says to forget what's down here and to live above. Keep your mind on things that are above, where Christ is. Because it says in the book of Ephesians that we are already positionally seated with Christ in the heavens. Therefore, keep your mind on heavenly things and don't get mogged down and mired down in the mud down here. And too many times we in little ways deny Christ. Even on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. There are times where we could share Christ with someone. We could give a kind word and a smile and say, praise God and thank you. Or I heard a priest the other day say, us Catholics, we're so shy, but if somebody comes and says, I'm having this problem, he said, why don't you just reach out and put your hand on their shoulder and say, let's pray right now, and just pray for them. And he says, if we did that, the world would be a different place. But I think many times we deny Christ even by the refusal to wear a cross or to let people know who we are.
Right, and these socially awkward things, in a certain, they have a kind of pain connected to them that's different than what the martyrs suffer. I mean, in kind and in degree, in every way, and yet we sincerely do find them painful. And the martyrs can be a kind of prod. Go ahead and make the sign of the cross before you eat in a restaurant. Even if it makes you feel very uncomfortable and weird, go ahead.
There's a martyrdom that is talked about among doctors and pharmacists and others. It's a bloodless martyrdom at this point, where they are refusing to sell abortifacients or contraceptives, or refusing to do abortions in hospitals, and they lose their job. These are martyrdoms. These aren't where we're dying, actually, where we're getting put in a coffin and buried under the ground. But there are many heroic Christians out there that are suffering a kind of martyrdom every day. I'm thinking of the people who get put in prison because they're standing out in front of an abortion clinic or out in the cold. They continually fight the good fight over and over again, and they suffer for it, whether it's losing a job because you refuse to do an abortion. There are many, many ways that Catholics suffer today. We even suffer with our family members, mini martyrdoms, if you want to call them, when family persecutes us for the faith. But if we look at those things as that Jesus suffered and died for us, and he said, if they hate the master, how much more are they going to hate his servant? And he suffered for us and died for us. And the least we can do is not deny him and be willing to follow. He who doesn't take up his cross is not worthy of me, Jesus said. And people who heard those words, what we saw in Mel Gibson's movie of Jesus carrying his cross, when Jesus said those words to people, pick up your cross and follow me, or you're not worthy of me, they saw that every day. They knew what it meant.
Indeed. Steve Ray, you can find him at CatholicConvert.com. If you want to travel with Steve and his wife, all the information is there. If you want to find Steve's books or films, those are also there. The film that we talked about this hour, Steve, it was the Apostolic Fathers, right?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, you can find the Apostolic Fathers by Steve Ray. Hey, we got to shut down the phones, then we'll turn them back on, and then they should work, and then we can have a pro-life open forum coming up with Dr. George Delgado right after this. Won't be a very good open forum if we don't get the phones working, but we will.
Catholic Answers Live.
Wouldn't it be great to have a book to give to anyone to explain exactly why Catholics believe what we believe? The good news is that now there is. Why We're Catholic is the groundbreaking new resource by apologist Trent Horn. That one book you can hand to anyone as a starting point for helping them find their way into, or back to, the practice of the Catholic faith. In a series of short, easy-to-read chapters, Trent covers the whole range of common topics, starting with why we believe in anything at all, and answering all the common objections to the Catholic faith, both doctrinal and moral. Don't miss out on the most important, life-changing book to come along in years. Better yet, it's only $3 a copy when you order in bulk. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Hi, this is Trent Horn. Are you looking for a dynamic Catholic speaker to present at your next conference or parish event? Well, we've got a whole host of speakers who are eager to share the truth of the Catholic faith in your community. Go to CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com to get all the information you need to make your event the talk of the town. That's CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com.
In a culture that worships the pursuit of sexual pleasure, the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception can seem archaic and unintelligible. Its critics say it is outdated, theologically unfounded, and even harmful. And even faithful Catholics can have difficulty explaining this moral teaching. Catholic Answers is out to change all that. That's why we've just released Trent Horn's dynamic new DVD, The Case Against Contraception, using scripture, papal and magisterial teaching, natural law, and new insights provided by social science and medicine. Trent put forward a compelling case for Catholic teaching with his trademark charity and persuasive graciousness. Be prepared to give a defense. Order your copy of The Case Against Contraception today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging onto the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What difference does it make who or what you worship, or what you believe? Sharing the faith used to make some people mad because it challenged their own strong beliefs. Today, it makes a lot of people yawn because they don't have strong beliefs about anything. Religious indifference is the great spiritual sickness of our age, a product of the relativism that dominates modern culture. This is Matt Nelson, and in my new book, Just Whatever, I'll take down the building blocks of religious indifference one by one. We'll look at the different kinds of indifference you tend to encounter in your friends and family members to see where they come from and why they're seductive. What you believe matters. Find out why and what to do about it in my new book, Just Whatever. You can order your copy of Just Whatever by calling 1-888-291-8000, by visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Looking for the best and solid Catholic resources that can answer your questions on all things Catholic? Looking for books, audio, and DVDs by the top Catholic thinkers and speakers on the planet today? Stop in today and visit the shop at Catholic.com. All of our resources are time-tested, apologist-vetted, and trustworthy and faithful to the teachings of the Catholic Church. There's no better source for solid Catholic resources anywhere on the internet. When you're shopping for good Catholic books, CD, DVDs, and more, turn to someone you can trust. Visit the shop at Catholic.com today. That's shop.catholic.com.
Just like the saints of the Counter-Reformation, our own souls are in constant need of reform, of reconversion to God and His will for us. We struggle with sin. We become distracted in prayer. We find it hard to be loving and easy to be selfish. In Reform Yourself, Sean McAfee shows you how these magnificent saints can be guides to your own personal transformation. We all need to reform our souls. Let the saints who reformed the church show you how. Order your copy of Reform Yourself today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Pro-Life Open Forum this hour. If you've got a question about life in any of its stages and the ethical treatment of life in any of its stages, if you can be any, open forum means open, so you don't have to be Catholic, you don't have to be pro-life. If you've got a question you want an answer to, even if it's a challenging question, we're happy to take it. 888-318-7884. I can happily report that assistant producer Marie, producer Darren, and sound, what are you, Czar? Sound Czar. Nicholas fixed the phones, so we can take calls this hour, 888-318-7884. Our guest this hour is Dr. George Delgado, and you probably know Dr. Delgado. He is the medical director for the, I got to get this right, the medical director for the Culture of Life Family Healthcare. It used to have a slightly different name, and so I go the wrong way sometimes. He's a board-certified physician in family medicine and in hospice and palliative medicine. He also has this certification from the healthcare ethics part of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Dr. Delgado, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. It's great to be here.
I have to tell you, as we await calls, and you're welcome to call again, 888-318-7884. Maybe I'm wrong about this, I don't know, but I don't have strong feelings about, on a moral level, about whether the government provides health care or not. And I realize everybody's supposed to have strong views on that, and I don't. But every time, I keep hearing these things, especially from Great Britain and Canada, where they have government health care systems, about crazy transgender stuff being done and about children being, the wishes of the parents not being respected in the care of children. And it makes me think maybe we can't have, maybe I should be a little more up in arms about the possibility of nationalized or state-run healthcare, because what happens with you doctors, and do you just fall into the grip of the latest fad? Or I'm not blaming you, Dr. Delgado, but do you see what I'm saying? It just seems like these systems, these large systems, are unable to continue to respect the dignity of people's lives.
Well, your concerns are well-founded, and I agree with your statement that, from a purely theoretical principle standpoint, it's morally neutral whether or not the government takes a large role in healthcare.
Yeah.
However, once the government takes over healthcare, and if it starts to move into socialism, then we know, of course, that socialism is antithetical to Christianity. Mm-hmm. And socialism puts the state above all, including above God. And socialism seeks to control every single aspect of society, including, if it's a socialist medical system, what goes on in medicine. Now, doctors, by and large, are good people, and they go into medicine because they have good hearts and they have good morals. However, at least in modern history, doctors have been shown to follow along with the winds of the time. For example, in Nazi Germany, we would not have had the Holocaust, or at least they wouldn't have been able to execute all of the Jews and other people so easily if the medical profession had not gone along. And it all started with physicians euthanizing people who are mentally ill, and then people, babies and children with birth defects. and they perfected the system there, and then they adapted that system of euthanasia, of euthanizing the people who were considered to be not fit enough to live. They adapted that system to the concentration camps, and it was because the medical system, the medical profession, accepted that they could end the life of someone who was deemed not worth living, that was able to take place. So you fast forward to our times, to places like United States and Canada and other so-called liberal democracies, and what's happening? Well, you have the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which of course is not a governmental agency, but it's a large professional group that's at least purportedly represents all obstetricians and gynecologists, saying that that obstetricians and gynecologists, if they do not perform abortions, they should locate their offices close to an abortionist's office, and they should make ready referrals. And you have things that are going on in Canada and other countries where doctors are being pressured or coerced to refer for abortions or perform abortions.
Yeah.
In England, the same thing. So you can see what happens when the government or another entity takes control. The medical profession, unfortunately, is going to go along with it. So I think prudentially, that kind of government involvement in healthcare is not a good thing. The government needs to have checks and balances, and it can play an important role, but it should not be given full control over a health system.
Do you, in the state of California, find yourself bumping up against laws and lawmakers and regulators and things who are maybe not sympathetic to a pro-life office?
Yeah, every once in a great while, I'd say. We're having that all the time, of course. And, there's a law here in California where parents are compelled to immunize their children. The merits and the demerits of immunizations are a whole different topic, of course. But I firmly believe that parents have the right and the responsibility and the duty to decide what care and especially what preventive care their children will get. If they don't feel that immunizations are in the best interest of their children, they shouldn't be compelled to do that. But here in California, if parents want to have their kids in schools, including private schools, they have to have their kids immunized. And so that really is infringing upon the parents' rights and responsibilities. It's another example of the state taking too much control over families and their lives.
888-318-7884 is the number. I'm about to go to calls and callers. I'll tell you what, if I go to you and you can't hear me for a second, just hang on. We'll get it straightened out because we've had a couple of twists. But I'll do a little bit of magic with the buttons here, and we'll do our very best to get you on. If you have a question about life in its earliest stages, the ethical treatment of human life, when people are sick or when they have genetic difficulties or abnormalities. So if you have questions about the end of life and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate at the end of life, Pro-Life Open Forum with Dr. George Delgado is the perfect hour for you. You are welcome to call 888-318-7884. We start with Valerie in Buffalo, New York, listening on the Station of the Cross. Valerie, do we have you there with us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Yes. Your question for Dr. Delgado.
Hello.
Oh, hang on.
Go ahead.
Valerie, can you hear us?
Hello.
All right. Valerie, if you can hear us, go ahead and give us your question.
I can hear you. And my question is about end of life. And I was interested in the medications they seem to use for that. At least the drug of choice in our area has been morphine, which I understand decreases the appetite and the want for fluids, and possibly does it enhance death sooner? Is my question.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question, and a question that we often face when we're treating people at the end of life. So morphine is a very useful drug because at the end of life, some of the common symptoms that people experience when they're dying, number one, pain, and number two, shortness of breath. And morphine is a very good pain-relieving medicine. It also is very good at decreasing the sensation of air hunger. So that's the reason why people who are on hospice often will get morphine near the end of life, because it's so effective for that. So the question is, can morphine end someone's life? Well, the answer, of course, is yes if it's used inappropriately. So if I took an extra large dose of morphine, I could end my own life. If I gave a patient a dose that was too large, I could end my own life. So the medication has to be used judiciously, and most good hospice professionals do use it judiciously, and they dose it according to the symptoms. As long as you're dosing it according to the symptoms, we do not think it ends life prematurely. And in fact, there have been some studies done showing that actually people who have their symptoms very well palliated at the end of life actually live longer than those who don't get good palliation of their symptoms with medications and other means. So we think that actually it does not. Now, theoretically, though, we should consider if that's a possibility. And at least from a theoretical standpoint, it is a possibility, of course, because we know that morphine can slow down the breathing. But the way we can justify the use of it, even with this theoretical risk, is by using the principle of double effect. The principle of double effect means that you have no other better treatment in order to alleviate symptoms, and you have one action, in this case would be given the morphine, and you have two potential effects. One is alleviating symptoms at the end of life, and the second is potentially hastening death. And in this circumstance, the hastening of death a short while is not of greater magnitude than alleviating these very, very difficult symptoms. And although you may foresee that possibility, that's not what you want. You only want to relieve symptoms. And in this case, then, the principle of double effect could be applied. But again, that is often theoretical because in most instances when the medication morphine is used appropriately, it does not hasten death. So that answers your question. I would, as sort of a sidebar, I would be remiss of me not to mention that I do feel that in some situations, perhaps in hospitals included, that sometimes patients are given doses that are too large because people feel that ending the life is ending the suffering and therefore is justified. Now, if you give morphine in order to end the life and that's in order to end suffering, then that is a misapplication of the principle of double effect, because from the principle of double effect to be applicable, the good effect cannot come from the bad effect. Both the good and the bad effect have to come from the same action. But if you have one action giving an overdose of morphine that causes death, and because death has occurred, then obviously the patient's not suffering, that is not an ethical application of the principle of double effect. Does that make sense to you, Valerie?
I've just experienced it in a family member where they were first on Lortabs and then they moved them over to the morphine because I don't know why. I think because her insurance paid for that and it was less expensive. And otherwise they would have had to do some paperwork for it, and she really didn't do well on that. And where she had been eating, 2 days into the morphine, she stopped eating. And then she died.
Yeah, morphine, that could have been coincidental. Morphine does not actually decrease appetite. So it could have been that she was going to die and they just happened to start the morphine 2 days before. We've obviously seen that. We've had people admitted to hospice. They die a few days later. People think that, well, they died because they went on hospice. No, they died despite going on hospice. So again, it's hard to say with a particular case, but that's probably what the thinking was.
Valerie, thank you very, very much for the call. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. There are lots of calls, and so we're going to go through them. We'll take them one by one and get through them. I think there's going to be one line open now, 888-318-7884. Your calls for Dr. George Delgado on this Pro-Life Open Forum right after this.
There's only one. Catholic Answers Live.
As a Catholic talk show host and speaker and author, I'm often asked, how should we pray? How do we pray? Really? It's up to you, and that's between you and the Lord. We have wonderful, wonderful formalized prayers in the Catholic faith, such as a rosary, the Lord's Prayer, novenas, but you can also just open up your heart and say, Lord, help, SOS. It's as simple as that. How you pray is really up to you. Ask the Lord how you should pray, and He'll answer you.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Dr. George Delgado is our guest. And our topic, well, if you have a question about life in any of its stages, that's our topic. It's an open forum for pro-life questions. By the way, if you're not a pro-life person and you have a question, you're welcome to call. Anyone is welcome to call. 888-318-7884. We go now to Teresa in Tulsa, Oklahoma, listening on St. Michael's Radio. Teresa, your question for Dr. Delgado.
I think I lost you.
Teresa, we can hear you. Go ahead with your question. We heard you.
Oh, hello. First of all, thank you, Dr. Delgado, for having these answers available to us. My question pertains to transplants and how all those procedures reconcile with the church teaching of being buried as a complete body. How does those two reconcile together?
Yeah, that's a great question because, the church teaches that as a sign of our belief in the resurrection of the body at the end of time, that the human body should be respected, that the remains should be respected and should be buried together. And that doesn't mean there are not exceptions to that. So some of the exceptions you may not have even considered, and that would be, for example, the relics of saints. We have saints' bodies who are carved up so that we have little pieces of saints' bodies all over the world. And that is considered acceptable because it has a greater purpose, and that's to venerate these holy people and that these relics draw us closer to God. However, if someone's body were carved up and the pieces taken around as a sign of disrespect, and especially if it were a sign of unbelief in the resurrection of the body at the end of time, then that would be sinful. So it's sort of the general principle with certain exceptions. The other exception is when a person donates organs, either when the person is alive or if the person donates organs to be taken at the time of death. That can be a great and noble thing to give of one's body in order to improve the health or even save the life of another person. So that sacrifice, in a sense, of bodily integrity is a greater good, and that's considered acceptable. Now, when you talk about organ transplantation and removal of organs from people who are recently dead, that goes into a whole other controversy that we probably don't have time to discuss now, but suffice it to say that there is some controversy about whether brain death is the human person is really dead or not, and if by relying on brain death, if we are taking organs from actually living people and killing them, that of course would be totally immoral, and that's something that has to be considered very, very carefully if the person's heart has not stopped beating. The other part of the question is, what about donating your body to science? And that, again, if it is done in a respectful way, furthering the education and the learning of medical professionals, as well as advancing science in order to help humankind, is a good thing. And as long as the bodies are treated respectfully, and as long, of course, as you still have a Catholic funeral or memorial mass, then there's no problem with that. And all of those things are great sacrifices that can advance the common good and advance the individual health of different people.
Teresa, thanks very, very much for that call. We will have to leave it there. We go now to Leslie in Northeast Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Leslie, your question.
I know that when I was young, in my 20s, I was not able to articulate positions about abortion or in vitro or euthanasia. And thanks to Catholic Answers, I can do so now. But are you finding that people instinctively have that same position, that they're against it, but they don't know why, and it takes your expertise or help to help them understand why? Thank you, and I'll just listen for the answer.
So I think people instinctively can make the connection that the preborn baby is a human being. And there are several ways that I think that that realization is made. Of course, without any technology, when it's obvious, of course, as a woman's pregnancy develops, that she starts to develop the baby bump, the visible uterus protruding from the abdomen. And then at 18 to 20 weeks, she starts to feel the movement inside of her. That is such a profound manifestation of that human life that, it has a term of its own called quickening. And many, many years, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before we had the knowledge of embryology, in fact, it was felt that the quickening was actually when the life started. And it wasn't until later that we figured out, well, no, actually it started before. But that's how profound a physical manifestation that is. And then, of course, further into the pregnancy, other people can put their hands on the mother's belly and feel the kicking. And that can be a profound experience. And then doctors can listen with primitive fetoscopes, which are non-electronic stethoscopes, to listen over the abdomen. And, closer to 30 weeks, they can start to hear the fetal heartbeat. And then as we fast forward now to our technology, we can see the human fetus and the human embryo on ultrasound. And enough people have seen these ultrasound images now where they can see that, yes, well, gosh, that's obviously a human head. Those are obviously fingers. Those are obviously movements of arms and legs. That's obviously a face. All of these things are very concrete and obvious to us as we see it. So it'd be hard not to make that connection. As we move down or upstream developmentally, and we see that as a baby is smaller and less developed, well, you can still see the shape looks. You can tell sort of what's the head and what's the tail end, and you can still make that connection. And then as you get more into the knowledge of the genetics and the chromosomes and how all that goes, and how from the time of the fusing of the sperm and the egg, there's a unique genetic individual who will never be reproduced again, then you have to make that connection that, yes, that's a human person, and the only difference between that human person and you or me standing on our own 2 feet is environment and place on the developmental continuum. So I think with all that knowledge and with that kind of explanation, people can start to really grasp that idea. And the ones who are arguing against that are really put into a corner, and they're finally left with some of the positions that some of these pro-abortion people are taking, including some of the people at Planned Parenthood, is that they're acknowledging that this is a human person, but they're saying that the woman's right trumps that person's life. And so they're just outright saying the woman has a right to kill her preborn baby. And so at least we've gotten to that point where it's a clear discussion of what's happening, and it's less obfuscation of what's happening. And then we can talk about, well, really, does a person have the right to kill another person just because that person is living inside of you? And most people of goodwill would say, well, no, that person has just the amount a right to live as you do. And the design of human fertility is that one person is very dependent on another person for 9 months, and then after birth, still very, very dependent, although outside of the body, but still requiring a lot of nurturing. And so it's just a matter of location.
Leslie, thank you very, very much for the call. It's a fascinating question, and it does get you to the idea that if science is really the ally of life here, that a common sense understanding late in pregnancy is easy to get. But as you go farther and farther back to the origins of the person, the assistance of science is invaluable. It answers all kinds of questions.
That's right.
All right, let's go to Jim in Seattle, Washington, listening on Sacred Heart Radio. Jim, your question for Dr. George Delgado.
My question is from the perspective of the artist and Saint Pope John Paul II. When you were working with the people in the movie Unplanned, the experience is supposed to change the artist as well as the audience. What did you, as a artist playing a doctor there, what did you learn from that whole? You get what I'm saying?
From the movie Unplanned.
Well, First of all, I think you're confusing me with Dr. Tony Levatino, who is a colleague of mine and serves on the board of the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs with me. He was the doctor who had the cameo role as the abortionist in that movie. And I did have a chance to talk to him briefly about his experience there, and he did say that it was quite a profound experience because Dr. Levatino was himself an abortionist, and he had a profound conversion experience and now is a very strong pro-life doctor trying to protect the lives of preborn babies and the health of pregnant women. And he did say that it was quite a profound effect that it had on him. As far as, my experience watching the movie Unplanned and how I think it can impact the culture, it was quite a movie that was very realistic from what I understand from comments I've heard from Abby Johnson, who wrote the book on which it was based. And in fact, the movie makers were criticized for having some things that were too realistic. For example, they were criticized by some pro-life people because they had some of the protesters outside of the abortion clinic who were not the prayerful, loving type of people that we normally see at these abortion centers, but these are the ones who are holding up angry signs and were criticizing and were demeaning to the women going into the clinic. Those people were there, and Abby saw them, and so they included it in the movie night. And I think, to their credit, it shouldn't just be sort of a propaganda piece. So I think, though, seeing the blood in the movie, seeing how abortions really happen, seeing what these people go through, will have a very strong effect on our culture, and I think more and more people will see it and be touched by it.
Thanks, Jim. Dr. George Delgado is our guest. It's a pro-life open forum. If you have questions about the ethical treatment of life in any stage, you're welcome to call.
Tim Staples, Trent Horn, Cy Kellett, Chris Check, Carlo Broussard. Our on-fire lineup of speakers will inform and inspire your audience to grow in their Catholic faith. For more information on booking a Catholic Answers speaker for your event, visit CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com today.
Have you subscribed to the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter? This is Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett, and I want to tell you about our new weekly newsletter full of behind-the-scenes information and facts you need to know about the show. It's easy to sign up. Just visit CatholicAnswersLive.com and look for the newsletter sign-up box on the front of the page. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the show and see what's coming in the days ahead, delivered weekly into your inbox. Sign up today for the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter and see what you've been missing. Go to CatholicAnswersLive.com.
Author Mark McNeil spent years in the Oneness Pentecostal movement, praying in its lively services, zealously spreading its unconventional teachings, and rejecting mainstream Christianity as misguided. Then he left it all behind. All in the Name is the story of a man who believed he was among an elite group of believers who followed the true faith when so many others had strayed. But an inquisitive mind, careful study, and the action of the Holy Spirit finally led Mark out of Oneness Pentecostalism and into the Catholic Church. This is an inspiring conversion story you won't want to miss. It's a faith strengthener for Catholics and an intriguing challenge to those who deny the doctrine of the Trinity. Order your copy of All in the Name today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
I'm Gloria Purvis.
And I'm Deacon Harold. The Morning Glory team talks about Uncle Nearest, the man behind the jack.
Tomorrow morning, 7 Eastern. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back. Pro-Life Open Forum this hour here on Catholic Answers Live. Dr. George Delgado is our guest. And there are lots and lots and lots of calls, so we're just going to keep working our way through the phones, make sure we get to as many as we can. If you'd like to get on the line with Dr. Delgado, 888-318-7884 is the number. Let's go to Jerry in Duluth, Minnesota, listening on Real Presence Radio. Jerry, your question for Dr. Delgado.
Hi, I am wondering if there's ever a good reason, or if it's even possible for a priest to sit on an ethics committee or anyone from the clergy and say that it's okay for this person to have their tube tied or a tubal ligation, surgically sterilize that person.
Well, I guess there probably are two parts to that question. The first is, should a priest ever be on such a committee? I would say that if a priest could be on that committee and be a good witness, then that's a possibility. But if that priest being on the committee would be giving tacit approval to the option of sterilization, that I think would create what we call scandal. Now, the second question that is implied here is that is sterilization, direct voluntary or direct sterilization ever ethical? And the answer is no. Okay, so indirect sterilization can be acceptable if you apply the principle of double effect. So the best example of that would be if a woman has a severe hemorrhage and they can't stop it using all the usual means, and she has to have a hysterectomy. The uterus is removed. That's the action. There are two effects. One is saving her life. The second is rendering her sterile. The saving her life is of greater magnitude than rendering her sterile. The sterilization is a foreseen but unwanted effect. And if there's no better way to do this, then that would be acceptable. However, sterilization, what we usually think of would be a woman doesn't want to have any more children. After delivery of a child or at some other time, she has a surgical procedure called tubal ligation, where her tubes are cut and or tied, which renders her sterile. That would be operating on and mutilating a healthy body part, and that would be going against God's plan. And so that would never be acceptable, even if the woman had a great risk of health problems if she became pregnant. So in a situation like that, where a woman is at great risk if she were to become pregnant, then she is to use the very effective means of natural family planning. She can't resort to those and never become pregnant again by carefully using natural family planning. That would be an acceptable way to avoid pregnancy, but having a direct sterilization would not be. So a priest would never be able to pronounce that as ethical. It just is not within his purview or power, and in fact, no person would ever be able to declare that a direct sterilization would be acceptable or ethical.
Jerry, thanks very, very much. I hope that was helpful to you. We go now to Rosie in Colorado. Rosie, your question for Dr. George Delgado.
Yes, my mom is being treated for a couple of serious illnesses. She's 82 years old and is in stage 5 renal failure. She's also being treated for tuberculosis and Clostridium difficile. So my question is, I'm not sure the doctors are giving me a realistic picture of her health. We're pushing through her treatments. So far she's still the green red, but I can see her losing steam. She has other minor issues like difficulty controlling her blood pressure and her blood sugar. So, and it has one healthcare professional did bring up the prospect that dying from renal failure is a peaceful process. So I'm beginning to question, who should I trust? They're giving me those kind of suggestions.
Yeah, those can be very difficult situations. I think you have to look at the principles first. And one of the things is, you want to see if your mother can tell you what she wants, because that's going to be very important. A patient's autonomy is very, very important. and the kind of treatment she's getting, particularly, I assume if she has stage 5 kidney disease, she's on dialysis of some sort. So the question you have to ask, is the dialysis becoming a burdensome treatment? Because dialysis can be burdensome. It can cause lots of side effects. They can have drops in blood pressure. They can be very fatigued. The quality of life patients who are receiving dialysis can be quite hindered. So you would ask, is the dialysis being burdensome? That would be something to ask. Number 2, are the antibiotic treatments for the C. difficile and the tuberculosis, are they burdensome? Are they causing a lot of side effects? And then you also have to look at the promise for improvement. By treating the C. difficile, are they relatively confident that they can clear up that infection in the colon? Because sometimes it can be cleared, sometimes it can't. By treating the tuberculosis, are they relatively confident that they'll be able to clear that infection? Will they be able to clear it in a reasonable amount of time compared to her lifespan? Because treatment for tuberculosis often is 6 to 9 months. So you have to look at those issues too. Then you kind of gather it all together and kind of weigh the risks versus the benefits. Find out if your mother can tell you what she wants. If she can't tell you, then did she express any wishes to anybody else, or did she appoint a surrogate decision maker? In which case, that surrogate decision maker should be very active, of course, in making the decisions. But what would be unethical would be to stop a treatment, let's say dialysis, with the intention of causing her death in order to relieve her suffering. That would be ethically inappropriate. But that's a whole different decision compared to saying, I'm going to stop the dialysis because the dialysis is causing her undue burden. See, I'm stopping the dialysis to take away the burden. I'm not stopping the dialysis to kill her. So that's where it's different, and that's where you kind of have to make sure you know where they are. And I think in discussing with the physicians, you would be perfectly within your rights to explicitly lay all that out, because most physicians are not that ethically astute as far as being able to separate these things out. They just haven't thought about it in the ways of principles. They're very utilitarian in their ethics because that's how they're trained. But I would really lay it out to them and say, I want you to tell me what's the possibility of recovery from these infections. Number 1. Number 2, how long is she going to live if she stays on the dialysis? Number 3, what can we expect as far as side effects from the dialysis? And then also, of course, talking to your mother. I think doing that and let them kind of putting them on alert that you are looking at this from a very careful, ethical perspective, they will hopefully respect that and they will engage with you, and tell them that you want as well as possible to be given good, accurate numbers as far as predictions, but not hyperbole and exaggeration of risks and side effects, because oftentimes they'll do that. Tell them you just want the straight numbers, and then you'll go ahead and make a decision along with them.
Rosie, thank you very, very much for that call. I hope that was helpful to you. Again, it's a pro-life open forum this hour on Catholic Answers Live. 888-318-7884 is the number. Dr. George Delgado is our guest, and we go now to Bob in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Bob, your question for Dr. Delgado.
My question is this. My wife has Alzheimer's. She's in a nursing home. She's had this disease for 5 to 6 years, depending on when you want to start counting. She's had the sacrament of, the sacrament of anointing of the sick on a couple of occasions. Is she still in sanctifying grace now, or do I have to worry that I've got to make sure that she gets another anointing of the sick before she dies?
Well, of course, that's a theological question, but I have encountered these sorts of situations in my practice, so I definitely will take a crack at it. My understanding is the anointing of the sick can be repeated, and some priests say, every 6 months is fine to repeat it, or if there's a big change in the condition of the patient and it's already been, a month or so since the last time. So I don't think there's any problem with her getting the anointing of the sick again. I think that's a good thing and very laudable and can certainly nourish her spiritually. But I don't think, whether she's in sanctifying grace, in a state of sanctifying grace, isn't solely dependent on whether she's received the anointing of the sick. It's also really where she is with God right now, and I think that's something that, if she cannot really communicate, you don't know, but you know what kind of a person she is, and you're praying for her, of course, and just, I would keep up the prayers that she stays right there with the Lord in her thoughts that you may not be able to perceive or understand because she can't share them with you. So I think any kind of suffering that you have, offer it up for her and continually pray and even fast for her. And if she can receive communion, I would certainly have the Eucharist brought to her on a regular basis. And if she's having trouble swallowing, which Alzheimer patients often do, then you can ask if the priest can just give her a little piece of the Eucharistic host. If even that's not possible, then you can maybe talk to a priest about if would it be possible to celebrate Mass at where she is, and maybe give her a drop of the precious blood. So try to be creative with that, so she can receive the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord, because I think that would be especially important for her as she gets further along in her illness.
Bob, thank you so much for the call. You sound like a wonderful husband. God bless you as you go through this with your wife. We have to take a break. We'll be right back with more Pro-Life Open Forum with Dr. George Delgado right after this.
We're glad you're with us. Stick around for more Catholic Answers Live.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Father Robert Spitzer.
First of all, you will get a much deeper awareness of your faith, much deeper awareness of the evidence for your faith, explanations of tough theological issues, how science and reason and faith come together, and above all, a deeper awareness of how to practice your faith and how to live it.
Father Spitzer's Universe with Father Robert Spitzer. Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's Pro-Life Open Forum this hour, and sometimes when we do these Pro-Life Open Forums, I notice that we get on a particular theme. We'll go down that route. We have not done that today, and a very diverse set of questions. If you have questions about life in any of its stages, if you have questions about particularly about Catholic teaching or about medical ethics more generally in treating and caring for those who are unborn, those who are recently born, those who are in the midst of their life, or those who are at the end of their life, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. As I said before, Dr. George Delgado is our guest. Dr. Delgado is a physician and trained in both family care and hospice care, as well as having a certificate in ethics from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And if you don't know the National Catholic Bioethics Center, I'll just tell you this. Here at Catholic Answers, we try to answer any question that comes our way about the Catholic faith. And if it has to do with bioethics and we don't know the answer or we need help with the answer, we send you right over to the National Catholic Bioethics Center. More calls, so let us go to Patricia in Charleston, West Virginia. You are next, Patricia. Your question for Dr. George Delgado.
Hello. My question has to do with the beginning of life, the age-old question of when life begins. And there's some question in various states as far as the law is concerned about at the first heartbeat or whatever. But my question is this. Isn't it so that new DNA is created the second an egg and a sperm unite? And therefore, is that not a human being then?
So you're right that from the moment that the sperm and egg unite, it's not new DNA that's created, but it's a new arrangement of DNA. You have a unique compilation of different DNA of what are called genes that is a genetic fingerprint that is unique to that person. And that, you have to be careful you don't say that you are a person because you have that unique DNA. Instead, I would prefer to say is that you are a person, a unique human individual, and therefore you have that unique DNA. It's sort of a marker. Just like you can say that people have unique fingerprints, but if for some reason I didn't have fingerprints, I would still be a unique human person, right? So the same thing goes for that DNA. It's a marker for our humanity as an individual human being. And when we have that first instant of having that, when the sperm and the egg unite, that's the mark of when we begin our journey as human beings. So it's kind of important to look at it that way. And it's, from an embryological standpoint, it's very intriguing that we have kind of the transitional stage where the sperm and egg first unite. They have separate nuclei, and the nucleus is a part of the cell, of course, it contains the DNA. Well, when the sperm and the egg unite, the separate nuclei have not yet fused. They start to travel together, and it takes some time. I don't know if it's minutes or hours for them to fuse into one. And so, but it's known that even before those two fuse, you can identify what in the future will become the head end and the tail end of that human being. So even that early, things are starting to be marked off as specialized. And so it's very, very interesting to see that. And that, of course, goes along with the whole notion that this is a new human being from the moment of conception, from the moment of fertilization. Now, people also bring up the term person. When is it a person? And person implies, from a philosophical standpoint, that there is a soul there. And it's interesting because the Catholic Church has not formally stated when that human being receives a soul. But Pope John Paul II stated in one of his encyclicals that we should assume that the soul is given to that human being right at the moment of conception. There's no reason to believe otherwise, because it would not make sense that you would have an actual human being without a soul. It just doesn't make sense, because we are body-soul composites. So to only have one and not have the other created, that just doesn't make sense. So we can assume, I think with good faith, that ensoulment occurs right at the time of conception, fertilization, when the sperm and the egg unite. And then the other concept is, what about the rights of personhood? Because now we get into that. And so we can determine that, yes, the preborn is a person, just like the frail elderly person who is totally demented and can't speak or walk is also a person by virtue of being alive and by virtue of being a member of the species Homo sapiens. But shouldn't those people all have the rights of personhood? All of us who are pro-life would say, of course. But those who favor abortion would say, no, they should not have the rights of personhood, or they deny that they are persons. And that, of course, has no good basis, no fundamental basis for argument, because how could you not say that a person should not have the rights of personhood? It just flies in the face of logic, and we need to make sure that we protect those rights of personhood and declare those rights of personhood in order to banish these false arguments, these lies that have been erected in order to dehumanize these preborn persons and to give people the right to kill these preborn persons.
Patricia, thank you very, very much for that call. It is Pro-Life Open Forum today. Dr. George Delgado is our guest. Dr. Delgado, one thing I don't know that I don't think we touched on, and I would like to get to a bit, is that there's this continuing normalization now of, and it seems to be a little bit under the radar, if I may say, of suicide and euthanasia. Are you seeing that? Does it strike you too that it's kind of coming in under the radar, but more and more people are treating this as morally normal and even morally laudatory?
It is, and I don't know if I'd say it's under the radar. I would say that it's rather insidious. People think of it as something good, but it's really something bad creeping into our society. And it's a very well concerted effort by the the group called Compassion and Choices, which used to be called the Hemlock Society. And this Compassion and Choices is very well funded by George Soros organizations. So it's important to know that these are not just grassroots efforts. This is very well orchestrated by George Soros money. And they are going across the country from state to state and going to states they feel are vulnerable. And they are one way or the other passing laws or having people vote on referenda that legalize physician-assisted suicide. So there are now about 6 or 7 states that have legalized physician-assisted suicide. And of course, it's all under the guise of patient autonomy, that patients should have a right to determine how they will live and how they will die. And this, of course, flies in the face of Christian anthropology, where we know that human beings are not masters of their bodies, they are the stewards of their bodies. So stewardship implies that you've been given a responsibility by a greater power, that being God, and God gave us the power, the duty, the responsibility to take care of our bodies, to guard our health, and to do things to promote that health. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we have to accept every treatment, including those that are burdensome. No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that we have a responsibility to preserve our lives and not to do anything that would put our lives in jeopardy unnecessarily, or certainly not to take our own lives, because that goes against the commandment, thou shalt not kill.
Do you share the concern that sometimes, however, taking people's lives is a lot cheaper for those who have skin in the game, maybe insurance companies, hospitals, and others, and that might motivate people in a certain direction?
It certainly could motivate them. So there are all sorts of ulterior motives and what we call secondary gain that can occur. It would be definitely much cheaper to end someone's life than to have to pay for dialysis or pay for expensive cancer treatments or expensive treatments for congestive heart failure or for caregivers for Alzheimer's disease. So you have health systems that may be pushing people in that direction. You also can have medical professionals in hospitals who are kind of frustrated at people coming into the hospital all the time. Hospitals get penalized for what are called readmissions, and that's when a patient is discharged from home or discharged to home or somewhere else and gets readmitted to the hospital within a certain number of days. The hospital gets penalized for that, so they want to avoid that. So for them, there certainly might be a motive to, if we can get that person's life ended, and we don't have to get that penalty of readmitting to the hospital. There also are family members who may be burnt out caregivers, and they're just tired of taking care of these people because it takes a lot of emotional and physical energy. They may have an incentive to push their families towards physician-assisted suicide, or there may be people who have an inheritance to gain. So all of these factors play into it, and it does become a slippery slope. And then the slope slides towards euthanasia. And right now we are having what can be termed soft euthanasia. That's where people stop feeding their loved ones on the advice of doctors. And that really, if the intent of stopping the feeding is to end the person's life, that is euthanasia. And that's happening all the time. But they say they're withdrawing care and focusing on comfort care. But feeding is comfort care. And when you take that away, unless there are instances, of course, when the feeding itself is burdensome or it's not reaching its finality, and then it's not obligatory. But there are many, many instances where it's taken away with the purpose of ending that person's life. So we are experiencing that, and I think it's an increasing epidemic. The other interesting thing is that studies have shown that in states that legalize physician-assisted suicide, that the general suicide rate in the population goes up. In other words, people who commit suicide who are not terminally ill and who do it outside of the law. And that, of course, is what you suggest, is that the perception that the value of human life is cheapened.
Right.
And so if the state is sanctioning that terminally ill patients can take their own lives because their suffering is unbearable, well then, myself as a depressed person, I feel my life is unbearable. I'm going to have less of a threshold to cross in order to attempt to take my own life because I see other people are doing it.
And one of the things that you've studied is palliative care. And
that's right.
And that means what? That's not taking people's lives, but that's...
No, it's not. So palliative care is a focus on relieving symptoms. And it's important to know that you relieve symptoms by treating the symptoms. You don't aim to relieve symptoms by ending a person's life. So you want to end the suffering. You don't want to end the patient. And so good palliative care focuses on treating those symptoms. And as I said earlier in the program, good palliative care people often live longer. And there are lots of studies of patients with cancer who go on to hospice programs. Hospice is a subset of palliative care. It's for people who have a life expectancy of 6 months or less. But studies showing that people who went on to hospice care compared to people who got usual cancer care, that those who went on hospice care lived longer. Why is that? Because they got more attention, they got more tender, loving care, and they weren't getting these toxins called chemotherapy that, while they can kill cancer, they can also kill patients. And so it's important to know that palliative care done correctly and ethically is a great good and something that for which we should strive. It's only like anything else in medicine, when it's abused, that we get into ethical problems.
Dr. George Delgado has been our guest. He's the medical director of the Culture of Life Family Healthcare, and he did not appear in the movie Unplanned. Dr. Delgado, thanks very much. We got a lot of questions in that hour. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.
2 hours of open forum tomorrow on anything. You got a question on any aspect of Catholic life, faith, history, Bible, whatever. We're happy to take your question, whether you're Catholic or not. We'll see you then, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.